Hi everyone, welcome back to another week on the Brush by Brandy YouTube channel. So this week we are going to be working on an empire style piece, and I love the empire style. Empire is characterized by a fairly flat, simple front. The legs do have this dramatic, over-exaggerated sweeping motion to them, and I love the overall kind of simplicity and classic lines of the empire style. I have one of these pieces in my own home. It's probably one of my favorite pieces I've ever done, and I try to pick these up whenever I possibly can. So this piece looked like it had gotten some water damage, so we're going to replace the top on this one. And the overall paint scheme, I'm doing this one using Annie Sloan paint, and that's because it's coming up where I'm going to be doing an event with Annie Sloan paint. And so I want to sample some of her paints and show you guys what they can do. The overall paint scheme is kind of inspired by an abstract landscape painting. I tried to pull the colors that you would find in a landscape, very soft, muted tones. That are a little bit warm and comfortable. So these are the colors I like to use in my own decor, and I think they turned out beautiful on this piece. So stick around and let's get started. Here's where I began on this piece. I picked it up off my local Facebook marketplace. You can see what I mean by that fairly flat front and then those sweeping legs on it. You can see this top too. It's in pretty rough shape, but overall I can't pass these up. It did come with this key inside it, and I was so excited that it was going to work, but it actually fit none of the locks. So much for that, but I did get this cute little Christmas ornament inside too. I started off on this top thinking that I could just peel off this top layer of veneer and use what was underneath, sand it down and stain that, and that would be my top. But once I started digging into this veneer, I found even more surprises underneath. Sometimes on these pieces, things don't always go as planned, so you have to kind of roll with the punches. You never know what you're going to get. Even when you've looked over a piece sometimes before purchasing it, there can be little surprises that are hidden when you start working on it. All right, so I started removing the top on this piece, and I noticed that it's not just the veneer, which is this bird's eye here. Then I get to this substrate that's underneath, which is another thin layer of wood. And then I've got a layer of just pine underneath that. So it's a total of 3 layers. And the reason I started going into the layer under the bird's eye is because even that's got damage. You can tell at one point the back of this piece got wet, and it's all along the back side has damage to it. So it would take me 3 layers to go through this. And then even when I look at the piece, it still has damage to the front end. So this top is so extensively damaged. The body's in good condition, and I don't see any evidence of it in the body. But this top is so damaged that I'm just going to go ahead and pop this top off and just replace this with a piece of pine that will look so much better instead of trying to patch this and strip the veneer off. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this now, and I will pop this top off and completely replace it. This piece also has some filigree moldings on the front. I don't think they're original to the piece, and so I went ahead and popped them off just using a paint scraper and then sanded off the glue. So when I first started on this piece, as what frequently happens, I started off with a color scheme that doesn't end up being my final look. But sometimes you never know, and you try something, it doesn't work. So this just didn't feel right to me, but I'm going to go ahead and leave it in the video because I still think it's a really pretty finish, and I'll save it for another piece. The colors that I'm going to use here are Annie Sloan Graphite, Aubusson Blue, and Florence. I'm just applying my paint using one of the Annie Sloan natural bristle brushes, and I'm just using a swirling motion. I don't want it to be super smooth. I'm going to add a little bit of texture just using random brush strokes in my paint. So let's go ahead and finish working these colors together and get this base coat of paint on. So what do you guys think? It's actually a really pretty color combo, and I do like the overall finish. I think it could have been really pretty, but when I stepped back and looked at it, it just wasn't the look that I was going for on this piece. I even tried to stay with this paint technique and I just lightened up the colors a little bit, added a little bit more green to them. It still just wasn't where I wanted to go with it. So we're going to scrap this look and start with something completely different. I just did a random sample on one side of the piece and I ended up liking it. So I'm going to go ahead and apply this to the rest of the body. So I would describe this paint finish as using a lot of layering and a lot of blending. I do consider these blends because the paint colors do overlap with each other and they sort of start mixing together, but they're a little bit more short linear blends. So for this, I'm using a thin linear brush. This is one of the flat brushes from Klingon, and I'm using this brush because I want to get those sort of linear vertical effects in my paint. I'm using a variety of shades of blue, green, white, and gray from Annie Sloan. I'll list all of those in the description for this post so you can see what I use. But I'm starting at the top with some soft blues and grays. That's going to run into the whites, back into the blue and gray, and then green and darker blues at the bottom. My inspiration for this piece, as I said in the intro, was sort of an abstract natural landscape painting. These are colors that you would find in a natural landscape, the greens and the blues, the whites of the clouds. And so I feel like it kind of has a very natural look to it. I'm using a little bit of water so that my paint is lighter in some spots, and I'm dipping my brush into multiple colors. So my brush gets overlapping colors onto it, and you start getting this sort of strié effect in the paint. As I move down the piece, I'm going to continue doing the same technique, only I'm going to change over to some different colors. And once I have a little bit of the color on the body, I try to make where they're overlapping with the previous color just really soft so it's a nice transition from one to the next. I'm wrapping up my paint finish. I did end up needing to do 2 coats of this technique all the way around the body, and my colors just wrapped right onto the front. So you remember that top that we looked at in the beginning? Well, I took that off. It just had some screws that screwed on from underneath. And now I bought a piece of pine at my local hardware store. It was about $50 for the piece of wood, but it's going to make a huge difference on this piece. I'm going to use a little bit of wood glue under the wood. I used my original top as a template to cut the size of the new wood. Once that wood glue was down, I placed my top, a few finished nails around all of the edges, and then I'm going to go ahead and fill those with some wood filler. Once my wood filler was dry, I went ahead and gave this a nice sanding with my Surf Prep sander, and I softened the edges a little bit. I chose not to router these edges because the simplicity of the Empire style has just really clean lines on it, and so I didn't want a decorative edge on this top. With my top nice and smooth and filled, the finish that I chose to put on this was a little bit of weather wash coating. And what weather wash is a weathered wood accelerator. It's going to gray this wood naturally. It ended up being a little bit darker than I wanted it to be, so I came back and gave it a color wash of Annie Sloan French linen over the top of the weather wash. And what a color wash is I just used a little bit of diluted paint, a very thin layer, brushed it over the entire top. I kept it wet the entire time, and then I came back and I wiped that paint back from over the top. Here's the finished look that I got on the top when all of it was done. You can see how that soft color wash of the French linen just softened the dark gray of the weather wash. For my finish coat on this, I'm actually going to use clear wax, and I don't use a wax on a tremendous amount of pieces, but on this one, I feel like it's completely in keeping with the style. So you can see one thing I love about wax is the immediate result that it gives. As I brush it on, you can already see how much deeper it makes these paint colors look. So there's instant gratification to waxing. The other thing that's really nice about it is I don't have to wait till dry times. I can come back and add decorative accents to this piece when my wax is just freshly applied. I like to apply my wax using a brush. You can also apply it using a cloth. Annie Sloan wax is really nice and soft and creamy, so it goes on really nice. And then I always love it when the weather's a little bit warm outside. It makes it even softer and it's super easy to apply. So I'm just using my brush in a circular motion. This is just an old random wax brush from my stash. I tend to be really hard on my wax brushes, so I don't like to use my nice ones for applying wax. I compare this to like waxing a car. You're going to massage it in and then you're going to come back and buff it away. So once I massage that wax in using the circular motion, I'm going to wait about 10 minutes for it to set up just a little bit, and then I'll come back using a soft cloth and just buff it away, and it gives this nice soft low sheen. I love to run my hand over a finished wax piece. It just has this nice soft buttery feel. The nice thing about wax too is as it needs to be maintained, you can apply wax over the life of the piece to continue with the protection. I did, however, decide to use a clear coat on the top of this piece. The reason I chose to use a clear coat on the top is it's just going to add an extra layer of durability, and the top tends to be the most used side of the piece anyways. I want to add some black wax detailing to the body of this piece. So I'm going to take a little bit of Annie Sloan wax in black, and I'm going to brush it into the very crevices, and then I'm going to smudge it out a little bit from the edges using another brush. I'm going to come back with a cloth and buff that away. I can apply this black wax over the clear wax, and that allows it to not saturate into my paint, so I can buff it away and apply as little or as much as I like. I'm really just using the black wax to add a little bit of this nice soft shadowing around the edges. With all of my wax work done, it's time to pay attention to my hardware. I like the original pulls on this piece, but they were originally gold and I want to dull them a little bit. So I gave them a good cleaning, and I used some matte black spray paint and then a coat of matte lacquer over the top for protection. All right, and here's our finished piece. I've got it staged. I just used a little chair, a few candlesticks, a little bit of greenery at the top, and of course it had the farmhouse feel, so I gave it the farmhouse sign. I'm thrilled with how this top turned out, and I love this paint finish. These colors are right up my alley. I hope you guys really enjoyed this video. You can find links for everything I use in the description for this post. You can find more Brush by Brandy on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, and YouTube, and on my website at brushbybrandy.com. If you enjoyed this video, please click that subscribe button for a new tutorial every week from Brush by Brandy.